Hello Math 8 students, this is Miss Dewitt. Today we're going to be taking notes for March 10th on more exponents review. You have a quiz coming up tomorrow, so this should just be review for you. We're going to start by taking a look at problem number 8 from your homework. So what I'd like for us to do is I'd like for us to use the commutative property of multiplication, and we're going to move some of these numbers around. I'm going to do that so that I can group my like types of numbers. So I'm going to bring all of my whole numbers together. So I have a 2, a 4, and a 3, and that's all over 3. So I just took the 2, the 4, the 3, and I kept that 3 in the denominator. Now I'm going to bring my x's together. I have an x squared, I have another x squared, I have an x, and in the denominator I have x to the negative third. I'll deal with that negative in the next step. Then I have a y to the fourth, a y to the fourth, and in the denominator I have a y to the second. So all I've done is just keep things in the numerator, just move them around, and the denominator, move them around a little bit also. So one thing I notice is that I have an equivalent form of 1 with my whole numbers. So I can simplify down that 3. I also notice that this is a negative exponent, and with a negative exponent, we need to take the reciprocal of it. So in order for it to become a positive exponent, we're going to move it to the numerator. So we would get 2 times 4. I'm going to leave that over 1, just because I'm going to probably need my denominator somewhere here. Then I'm going to bring my x's together, x squared, x, and that x to the negative third becomes x to the positive third. And again, I have nothing left in my denominator, so I'm going to put it over 1. And then I'm just going to use my exponent rules. Y to the fourth and y to the fourth is y to the eighth, and we're going to write that over y to the second. We'll subtract those in a second, the next step. But for now, let's just follow along. Okay, so we have 2 times 4 is 8. And now these are all in the numerator, so we can add the exponents because the base is all the same. So I get 2, 2, 1, and 3. And then with the y's, because 1 is in the numerator and 1 is in the denominator, we are going to actually subtract those. And I have nothing left in my denominator, so I can simplify this out. So I have 8, x to the 2, 4, 5, x to the 8th, y to the 6th. So hopefully you had that on your homework last night. If you didn't, go ahead and copy down those notes. Make sure you show your steps. Okay, Math 8 students, let's take a look at a couple more complicated problems that have a few more exponents in them. So here are your notes for today. Let's take a look at this example here. This example gives us 3 x to the third, y to the negative 1, z to the negative 1, all over x to the negative fourth, y to the 0, z to the 0. So I'm going to do the same thing I just did on that last problem. I'm going to separate it into like variables. So 3 does not have another number, so I'm just going to write that as 3 over 1. X's, I have x to the third over x to the negative 4. I'm going to write that by itself. Y to the negative 1 over y to the 0. And z to the negative 1 over z to the 0. Now the first thing I notice is that I have some 0 terms. And I just want to remind you that anything to the 0 power, n to the 0 power, anything, n, a, b, 25, anything to the 0 power is always equal to 1. So I'm going to change those two variables to 1 and 1. All right, so then I'm going to leave my 3 by itself. I have my x to the third, and then I notice there's a negative exponent. So just like on the last problem, I'm going to move it to the numerator in order to make it positive. So that is going to become x to the fourth all over 1. And then the same thing with the next problem. I have a y to the negative 1. So I'm going to move it to the denominator to make it 1. So I have 1 over y to the first And the same exact thing is happening with our z. So we're going to move that to the denominator, and I get 1 over z to the first. So now I'm going to bring those all back together. I can add x to the third and x to the fourth. That would give me x to the seventh. And then in the denominator, I have y to the first and z to the first. So put that all together, and that is your solution. Remember those important rules. Remember the exponents when it's negative, and remember the exponents when it's 0. Those are important things to remember here. Okay, so what happens, Math 8 students, when we are looking at something that has exponents, power to a power? So I'm going to move to the next page because this is going to take me a little bit of room to work out. So I have in parentheses 2x to the negative third, y, and all of that is raised to the second power, and then multiplying it by x to the negative 1 times y. In the denominator, I have 8x to the negative 3, y to the negative fourth, z to the 0. So the first thing I want to do is I want to make sure that when I'm taking a power to a power, everything gets that exponent of 2. So I'm going to write that as 2 to the second power, x to the negative 3 to the second power, and y to the second power. Then we have our x to the negative 1 and y, and we have our terms that are in the denominator. So hopefully you saw that we have that x to the 0, and we can change that to a 1. And then I'm going to do the same thing I did on the last set of problems. I'm going to kind of separate things and group things with their like variables. So 2 squared is going to go over 8. So now I have x to the negative 3 times 2, because when we raise a power to a power, we multiply those powers. So just a reminder, when you have x to the a raised to the b, you multiply a times b. So that's what we're doing there. I also have an x to the negative 1, and in the denominator I have an x to the negative 3. So I'm bringing all of my x's together in that problem, or in that fraction. And then I have a y squared and a y, and then a y to the negative 4. So a lot happening. So let's just take one piece at a time. So I like to separate it to make sure I understand what's happening with every single part of the problem. So 2 squared is 4. Okay. Negative 3 times 2 is negative 6. So that becomes x to the negative 6, x to the negative 1, x to the negative 3. A lot happening there. This y squared and this y to the first means I'm going to have 3 y's. So this is going to be y to the third over y to the negative 4. I have a ton of negative exponents. So I need to start moving those. So these two negative exponents I'm going to bring to the bottom, and this negative exponent I'm going to bring to the top. So that is going to be x to the third is going to be on the top because it becomes positive. And on the bottom is going to be x to the first and x to the sixth because those are going to become positive. I'm going to do the same thing with that y to the negative 4, not moving the y to the third because that's positive. That stays where it's at. So that's going to become y to the fourth, and I'm just going to have a 1 on the bottom. And I'll simplify 4/8 to 1/2. Okay, so now let's group everything together. It looks like I have 1 over 2, x to the third over x to the seventh, and y to the seventh. Okay, so make sure I did that right. Yes. Okay, so now looks like I can simplify this part of my problem. So I could do it a couple of different ways. I could subtract, but I think I'm going to get a negative. So I just want you to, over here, and you can also do this, work this out. So we have 1, 2, 3, x is on the top, and I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 x's. Let's make some equivalent forms of 1. So it looks like I have x to the 4th in the denominator. So this is going to become 1 over 2 times 1 over x to the 4th times y to the 7th over 1. And so I'm going to group everything back together because it looks like everything is simplified. And I'm going to get y to the 7th over 2x to the 4th. All right, Math 8 students. So you have the second half of your worksheet today. Check your playlist or grab that